Bad times don't last, but bad guys do. Survey says one more for the good guys. Scott Hall is somebody that left an incredible mark, an indelible mark, a very, very memorable series of memories, matches, moments throughout his 25-year wrestling career. And he sadly has passed away. He's passed away. The news broke yesterday, Sunday. This is being recorded late Monday night, just in case you're wondering about the timeline. And news broke that he had suffered, broken hip, and that he was suddenly on life support because he had suffered a series of heart attacks. And then Kevin Nash's longtime friend, posted on Instagram, I believe, that he was on life support. The Scott Hall's family was going to gather and then take him off life support. And news broke just when Raw went on the air. When WWE Raw went on the air. First thing people see, in memory of Scott Hall, Razor Ramon, born October 20th, 1958, passed away today, March 14th, 2022. He was 63 years old. And I'm going to get into career moments and stuff like that and some of my favorite stuff. And please, in the comments, let me know your favorite Scott Hall moments. You can't talk about the good without referring to the bad. He had his demons. He was not a perfect human being, and nobody in wrestling, nobody in life is. He's been very open about that stuff. He's been very open and real. A lot of the stories he shared, some of the stuff he had to take a bit with a grain of salt, but he was always entertaining. His shoot interviews he did with Nash, the shoot interviews he did on his own, appearances he had on Dark Side of the Ring. Scott Hall, memorable, and for a variety of reasons. And yes, he had to have the resurrection, and DDP had to help him through his, program, because they'd had such a long-standing friendship going back to the WCW days. I don't remember if they interacted much in the AWA. They may have. I'm not going to quote that chapter and verse, but in WCW, they developed a friendship, and then Scott got the rocket push and did, and was one of the best, one of the biggest stars of the 90s, one of the most memorable, made the Intercontinental Championship mean something. He was somebody that made that mid-card title mean something, and that was back when you had tremendous Intercontinental champions before him, and you would have some great ones after him. And he didn't hold it all the time throughout those 2.5 years that he had the championship. But goddamn, if Scott Hall didn't make that title mean something, goddamn if he didn't make you pay attention when he was on screen. He could command your attention. He oozed machismo. That wasn't just a line. That wasn't just a little gimmick. He oozed machismo. He oozed class, coolness. He was a cocky bad guy, but he was a cool bad guy. He took that to WCW and did so many great things there. And then personal demons and the resurrection, his Hall of Fame induction. But I'm gonna talk about that here in just a little bit. But this is tough because this is somebody I grew up watching. I do remember seeing syndication, like late syndication of the late days of the AWA, and seeing him and Curt Hennig. And at the time as a kid, I didn't really know what I was seeing. I mean, I loved wrestling from 1985, and when I got to see Scott Hall a little bit in WCW, and then when he came to WWE, it was just like, wow, okay, I just saw this guy on WCW television. It's like, well, I don't remember him being treated all that well. And holy shit, he's actually really good. Because I was 11 when he debuted in WWE, so for me, it was just great watching him. He had such a great look about him. And his matches were always really good. And yes, you could talk about when his head was on straight, though, brilliant wrestling mind and all that. But let's start at the beginning. And when we come to the end, we can stop. Unfortunately, the end means that we have to once again reference that Scott Hall is no longer here. He was trained by Hiro Matsuda. He debuted in Championship Wrestling from Florida in 1984. and retired from the ring in May of 2010, pretty much after his TNA run ended. And he had some times where he was away from wrestling for a little bit. He didn't really work much full time from 2000 on, but he had stints. But he had ring names like Texas Scott, Coyote, American Starship, not Jefferson Starship, because we built this city, hey yo, we built this city on machismo. Really should have opened the review like that, except I had to be somber. But the Diamond Stud, Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, The Outsider. He was an influencer. You want to talk about some people claiming to be the influencer. He was one of the big influencers that got more people to tune into WCW. But yeah, started out in Championship Wrestling from Florida. That didn't last too long, because at that point, Championship Wrestling from Florida still had good business. Unfortunately, Eddie Graham's untimely passing would lead to a serious downturn, because nobody else could manage it like Eddie Graham. And also, bigger companies were swallowing up the talent. Then he went to Mid-Atlantic. It wasn't treated badly, but he wasn't getting a whole lot of wins. He went to Bob Geigel's Kansas City territory. And actually, this is all within a year period. So he bounced around because there were territories that were starting to die off, but there were still territories around where he could gain experience. And you see Scott Hall's hair, like his hair is bouncing and behaving at this point. It was marvelous to look at. But we backtrack a little bit. In 1983, there was a situation that led to a second-degree murder charge, levied at Scott Hall during a self-defense struggle with a guy where a guy's gun went off. It was outside a bar, I believe. And Scott Hall said that haunted him. And it was referenced, I want to say it was referenced in the WWE documentary they did for him a while ago. But he's talked about it in shoot interviews and stuff like that. And it would be very traumatic. Self-defense or not, take somebody's life, it's just got to be very, very disturbing. But then he does his stints in, these territories. Goes to the AWA, and even though the AWA by this point, when he went to 85, was still doing good business, it was starting to go downhill. He would team with Curt Hennig, Magnum Scott Hall, Big Scott Hall, would just have this big, the big hair. The big hair was just, and of course he had the mustache and stuff like that. Of course, they were doing with the Tom Selleck thing, which, to be perfectly honest, that look actually suited pretty well. The whole Magnum TA thing, even though Magnum TA looked more like Tom Selleck than Scott Hall fucking did. But not as much as Tom Selleck looked like Tom Selleck. But he teamed with Curt Hennig. They were tag team champions for a brief time. They lost the titles by a countout, which was weird. They would split up. Curt would go into a feud with Nick Bockwinkel, eventually win the AWA championship. And Scott would continue to do stuff in the AWA, but he would also start doing stints in New Japan from 87 to 1990. Because as the AWA started to ease back on its schedule and then eventually just get to where they were just shooting TV in a few places and syndicating on ESPN, they weren't able to draw a crowd much of anywhere. Scott Hall decided, I'm going to leave. It was 1989. There was talk, depending on who you believe, that Verne Gagne was going to put the title on him, but really would that have meant much of anything? I mean, Larry Zbyszko was the final AWA champion, and they weren't drawing anything because they were out of money, they were out of ideas, talent was leaving. He did leave and went to the NWA briefly in 1989, and now that didn't last very long because he was doing his stuff in New Japan, and he met Undertaker there when he was meeting Mark Callis, just before he went to become the Undertaker. And his 89 run in NWA WCW was just I want to say a few months. It wasn't very much. He went to the Catch Wrestling Association in Germany in 1990. Otto Wanz, I believe, was a man that owned it. And he just did some stuff there, more journeyman stuff. He was in World Wrestling Council in Puerto Rico, as were a lot of people in 1991. Returned to WCW in 91. Team with DDP, the Diamond Stud. This is where he was starting, not necessarily doing the Razor Ramon character, but he was starting to get more of the look. The hair, the slicked hair, the look and everything, and, doing all that, just getting more of the mannerisms down. And then he left in May of 92, joined WWE very soon after he left WCW, and Razor Ramon was born. I do remember seeing the vignettes. This is before Raw, so we were seeing some syndicated stuff, Wrestling Challenge, and other things. And you would see this guy, and you're like, well, he's tall. He's 6'7", 6'7", 280, 270, 280, depending on the year, and if he was in better shape. Unfortunately, sometimes it looked like he was topping around 300 because personal demons were grabbing hold. And he was going through personal demons at this point, but he was cut, and he was ripped, and he was in really, really good shape. And he rose up the ranks really quickly. Like, he was at I could talk about some of the best matches in Scott Hall's career, and I will here. But Survivor Series 1992 is probably the first notable match that he had, even though he had other stuff going on. He teamed with Ric Flair against Randy Savage and Mr. Perfect. And that was because I believe it was the Mega Maniacs, if I recall correctly. Or Ultimate Maniacs. That's what it was, because Warrior had fired due to him and British Bulldog getting caught with steroids. Razor Ramon teamed with Ric Flair. Pretty good match from what I remember. More of a storyline match, but it was what it was. Big deal, though, considering where he was just a little bit before. And then gets a bit of a rocket push by taking out the Rocket, Owen Hart. Beating him up, targeting Bret the Hitman Hart's family. Getting a shot at the Royal Rumble 1993 for the WWE Championship. Bret, in the midst of a big push, could always work well with people. He did tremendous work. It looked like Scott Hall might actually get the victory. He was Razor Ramon, hey, yo, the old Tony Montana thing from Scarface. He came up with it. The vignettes were fucking great. He just oozed class. He did the car stuff. He was like driving around the cars, custom-made cars, the shirts. Some of the shirts were ridiculous, but it was also really, really cool just to see a guy had the toothpick, the Cuban accent, and he was actually part of the first episode of Raw, and it was a big goddamn deal. The first episode of Raw happened just a couple weeks before the Royal Rumble, or maybe was it just a week or two before? It might have been just a week before the Rumble. The whole point is, he faced off against Bret Hart in a tear down the walls match. Great stuff. And then he would go on to have a match, I believe, with Bob Backlund at Mania 9. Okay, maybe not the best, but hey, he got his first Mania match, and he got his first Mania victory. And then, about a year after he had made his debut, May 17th, 1993, faces off against the 1-2-3 Kid, the Lightning Kid, Sean Waltman, where, my God, you want to talk about something big. This is how giving Razor Ramon was when he was with the right people. Bounce him around, threw him around, everything, beat him up, and then hit the post or hit the turnbuckle like, whoa, he was all like this. 1, 2, 3, Kid does the moonsault. 1, 2, 3. Crowd explodes. Razor's like all upset and everything. And that sparked him putting $10,000 up to face the Kid, beating him up, doing all this stuff. What was great about this is he made the Kid a star while still keeping his star burning bright. That's what the professionals can do. That's some good shit. And from there, he would end up winning the Intercontinental Championship in October of 1993 when him and Rick Martel would be the final two in a battle royal, rather. After Shawn Michaels got suspended for some kind of drug test violation, depending on what you believe, it was a drug test violation, whatever actually did happen. The bottom line is Shawn was suspended and stripped of the Intercontinental Championship. Razor beat Rick Martel for it, and then would hold it for a bit. They would have the ladder match, which is, yes, an idea. They borrowed from Bret Hart and took it to new heights, literally, because that's what you have to do with a fucking ladder. Really hard to crawl down on a ladder, unless you're getting off of a ladder. Enough about this. They had a standout match at WrestleMania 10. And then he would lose the title to Diesel a little bit later on. I think a couple weeks later. He'd be the unified Intercontinental Champion. And Razor Ramon shine there. Yes, Shawn Michaels' star may have burned a little bit brighter there because he was showing off a little bit more, but Razor was there for everything. They did go a little bit over time, but still a standout WrestleMania match. And then, after losing the title to Diesel, he wins it back. He goes on to have another run, loses it to Jeff Jarrett, I believe at the Rumble 1995, and then loses again at WrestleMania 11, which turned out to actually be the last WrestleMania that Scott Hall was part of. He would not be part of WrestleMania 12 due to, I believe, a suspension of some kind, because the demons were taking hold. But still, he would be a face, he'd be a heel, people always cheered him. You could boo Razor all you wanted, but you couldn't help but respect him. And then he has what I argue is a better ladder match against Shawn Michaels at SummerSlam 1995. He I believe was part of the Strange Bedfellows tag team, or Survivor Series elimination match at Survivor Series 95. He had that match with Goldust at Rumble 96. Didn't really want to work with Razor, or didn't want to work with Razor. Didn't want to work with Razor. Razor Reception. He didn't want to work with Goldust. Yeah, that was maybe a little bit of weird stuff going on there and everything. Razor letting a little bit, maybe some bad views get in there, or maybe he just didn't want to work with Goldust and he wanted to leave. And depending on the story you believe, Scott had basically accepted an offer because he wanted to improve his position. He couldn't. He decided to go to WCW. They did the curtain call. That's been talked about. Not going to talk about it here. It wasn't my favorite moment, but it meant something to them. And at that point, kayfabe was already blown wide open. But then, May 20th, 1996. It's the Mauler and Steve Dahl, I believe. It's on a 2-hour Nitro. One of, if not the first 2-hour Nitro that they had. Nitro might have gone 2 hours just a bit before. But he comes down through the crowd. And that was an idea from Larry Zbyszko. Instead of coming down from the entrance, he came down from the crowd. You people, you know who I am. But you don't know why I'm here. He goes off on this, you want a war? You're going to get one. And then he shows up again the next week. And he talks about, oh, you started? We're going to face you. What do you mean we? You know who. You know who. And then Kevin Nash shows up just a bit after that. Oh, it's like you've been out here running your mouth for a while. It's like this is where the big boys play. Look at the adjective, play. We ain't here to play. Scott Hall was part of that moment at Great American Bash 96, where Eric Bischoff got jackknifed off the stage. And Hall was just cool. Nash was cool. They made it seem like an invasion. They'd obviously been signed by WCW, but nobody had known about contracts because the internet was still in its infancy. And then they had the famous, hostile takeover match at Bash at the Beach 96, which Hall was a big part of. And people have said, I believe Bischoff said it on a Legends of Wrestling roundtable, Scott's really good. When his head was on straight, tremendous wrestling mind, he was a joy to deal with. Unfortunately, the 1983 shooting and other substance abuses that had happened because of that and because of life on the road, personal demons, whatever, has started to take hold. Now, the NWO meant something, and kept Hall going a lot longer than he probably would have been able to at that point. He was having trouble at home. He'd been open about this stuff. And it just got to the point where things were really, really getting difficult. But him and Nash were the tag team champions. The NWO was a big fucking deal, especially in that War Games, match at Fall Brawl 96, where the fake Sting showed up. So one of my favorite matches. Hall being involved in War Games was a big fucking deal. It's back when War Games actually meant something. It wasn't the cartoonish stuff. In 93, 94, 95, this was brutal War Games. This was good shit. And then from there, it's not that the memories get cloudier, because he did put people over on random Nitros and Thunders, and him and Nash were still cool and everything. But then things started to even though he would always come out and do the toothpick and do all that stuff, by later 97, even though he had won World War III 97 and earned a title shot against Hulk Hogan at the time, well, whoever the world champion was, that was Hogan. They did Hogan versus Sting. Hall didn't get his shot until Uncensored 98, I believe. I think it was Uncensored 98. And didn't exactly work all that great. And then, unfortunately, from there, things really got sad because WCW felt the need in 98 and also 99 to mock the real-life problems that Scott Hall was going through. And I'm not saying that Scott was easy to deal with. I'm not saying that. But the substance abuse stuff, it got to where it was too on the nose and just too real. And also, this was around the same time that WWE did that with Hawk. It was uncomfortable what both companies were doing. Hall would end up being, even though they would reform the NWO, he would end Goldberg's streak doing the, because the NWO quietly dissolved, and then he was a security guard, shocked Goldberg's, shocked him and everything, just, did all that, was a security guard, and was part of the, reformation of the NWO, the finger poke of doom, even though that was Nash and Hogan. Hall was there too. By mid-99, it was getting sad, and by Super Brawl 2000, I believe, Super Brawl 2000, even though they'd done NWO 2000, it was obvious that Scott was not doing well. That was his last pay-per-view match. And then they were going to possibly bring him back, but no, they had Goldberg beat Nash, and he tore up Scott Hall's contract. And that was it. He appeared on a few shows in ECW. He did appear on a Japanese show where he put over a young Tanahashi. I want to say it was in August of 2001. The clip's floating around. You can check it out if you want. It was when Tanahashi was only 2 years into his career. And even at that point, you could see that Scott Hall still had a really good mind for the business. Then he had the personal issues and the other stuff. He had a stint in WWE, come back with the NWO, match with Steve Austin, match at Mania 18, match with Bradshaw. And then he had, I believe, a plane ride from hell, if I recall correctly. He was let go, went to TNA for a little bit, and actually had some memorable moments there, and then flowed around. Still personal issues, came back in 2004, was only there till early 2005. It was not good to see. And in 2007, he was there for a little bit, but then no-showed the late December pay-per-view. Came back in 2010. And then it was just a bad decline, because by then, it was obvious that it was getting so sad. And he talked about this. There was an ESPN documentary about him. And then in the resurrection of Jake Snake Roberts, they talk about how Scott Hall was going through a whole bunch of stuff. And DDP helped him. And then he had that resurgence as far as getting that Hall of Fame induction when he was clean, sober, happy. And he had that gracious speech. It was tremendous to hear. He still had the voice. He still had the ability to communicate. All the health issues hadn't quite taken hold of him. And then from there, he would visit the Performance Center and stuff like that, and would still be involved somewhat in wrestling, make appearances on Dark Side of the Ring, that kind of stuff. But he wrestled from, October of 84 to May of 2010, and even though from 2000 to 2010, it wasn't as frequent, you still think that for pretty much a 10-year period, not 10 year, but especially from 92 to 98, he was one of the biggest stars in wrestling. He was one of the biggest stars in the 90s, easily. WWE, WCW, he's the catalyst for the real-life WCW stuff, and tremendous Intercontinental Champion. 4-time Intercontinental Champion, I believe. And, he could make any belt work. Sure, okay, he did toss the TV championship at one point in the trash. At that point, the TV title didn't mean anything. That was in late 99 WCW. And no, he wasn't perfect. And there were things that Scott Hall did to piss me off as a person, because I just would see, him wasting away, that kind of stuff. But the addiction and what he dealt with was truly, it was amazing that he lived past 50. And the fact that he lived till 63 and his body just finally said enough is nothing short of a miracle. He had a hell of a goddamn career. Had a hell of a life, lived a whole lot more in one life than most people could live in 10. And through all the good, all the bad, all the great, all the horrible, Scott Hall left a hell of a mark on professional wrestling. And he will be sorely missed. And please, leave your favorite Scott Hall moments in the comments. I'm not going to do self-promotion here. You can... If you're watching this, you know how to find me. Rest in peace, Scott Hall. Almost got through this without crying. Rest in peace, Scott Hall. You will absolutely be missed, bad guy. But you will never be forgotten. Rest in peace.